Shabbat Shalom. How many of you noticed the picture that was on the screen? Did you know who the people were? Kevin, Charles Billiter, and me. I suspected you didn't know. I looked up there and I thought, where did that picture come from? Those of you who watch the way we haul hay nowadays, you can appreciate what it was like when we hauled it in little 80-pound increments instead of 1,500 to 1,800 pounds. We thought we had a big day when we hauled 1,000 to 1,200 of those, and that's not even a good, they don't even work up an appetite to do that in the morning. We're looking at Exodus 37 and 38 this morning, and also considering that we are in, this is the 8th day of the 7th month. And that means we're in the period called what? Days of Awe. It's the counting. The first day of the 7th month is Yom Teruah, the Feast of Blowing. And we talked a little bit about this. It actually does not say the Feast of Trumpets. It says the Feast of Blowing. It's Teruah. And a Teruah can be made on a trumpet, but it can be made with the voice. If you go to Psalm 47, where it says, shout unto God with the voice of triumph, it says, shout a Teruah. A Teruah has come to be this call on the shofar. Three triplets. And it's a call of triumph. It's a call of alarm. It's a call of, what's the best way to term it? I like to think of it as an awakening. It's a call that goes forth, that calls us to something. And so 8 days ago, actually 7, this is the 8th day, we were called to something that's coming 2 days from now. And for some reason, this is lost in the church when there's probably no more sober commandments concerning a day than the Day of Atonement or the Day of Covering. Yom in Hebrew is day. Kippur is from Kippurim. It's to cover. The Day of Covering. I'd like you to go to Exodus 37. Exodus 37 describes the 4 items of furniture that are in the holy place, or the most holy place. So these are items of furniture that the congregation did not see, because they were either behind the first veil, or in the case of the Ark of the Covenant, behind 2 veils. And it starts off by saying Bezalel made the Ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high. Then it describes the table, which is what's on the table. 12 loaves of bread, right? And then the next thing it describes is the menorah, which a lot of our translations will call a lampstand. These are pretty good representations. The menorahs we have slope down to the end. If you look at the menorah on the Arch of Triumph in Rome, I think that's where it is. It's in Italy someplace. It's flat across the top. But it's 7 lamps. Then the final thing in the holy place is the altar of incense. What can you tell me unites all 3 of these? Gold. Everything in the holy place and the most holy place is gold. Now the table is not gold, but the racks that the loaves are in is gold. Then the next chapter is about the altar of burnt offering and the laver. And what are those 2 items made out of? Bronze, copper, your translations will, but certainly not gold or silver. Then it talks about the courtyard, and then it totals up the materials used. What's interesting is every time God talks about building the sanctuary, he starts with the ark. How often did the children of Israel see the ark? Yep, they saw it when actually, you know, they probably did, but they may not have seen it, right? It may have been covered with the drape. Yeah, when they did, I was going to say, every time they looked at the ark, how'd it go? It was bad. But the first thing that God talks about when you go to Exodus 25, in fact, I'd like you to look at Exodus 25. The writer of Hebrews brings this passage out too. Exodus 25, verse 8, when the Lord commands Moses to tell the Israelites to bring offerings, gold, silver, gold and silver, but mostly purple, blue, and scarlet yarn. Then in verse 8, he says, have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. While you're thinking about that, let's go to 1 Chronicles 22. This is a similar setting, but instead of Moses telling the people what God had told him about the tabernacle, this is David. 1 Chronicles 22, verse 11. Now, my son, the Lord be with you, and may you have success and build the house of the Lord your God as he said you would. May the Lord give you discretion and understanding when he puts you in command over Israel. If you look around in both Chronicles and Kings, as well as Exodus, one thing you will find out is when a habitation was built for God to dwell in, he said, make it exactly like I told you. One of the challenges that we have with our church mindset is we build churches for people. We want the acoustics to be right. We want it to feel worshipful. We want it to hold the people. And these aren't bad things. Don't misunderstand me. We don't build them for the person who's supposed to dwell there. And when you look at the tabernacle and then again the temple, in both cases, God was plain and direct. And he said, make this according to the pattern that I've shown you. And in David's case, I just gave you one verse. If you read about it, you'll find that God showed him how the temple was to be built. And that's why he started accumulating materials to build it. Why is this important, this distinction? I've told you the funny story many times of Sam, my brother-in-law, who we went to town one time, and in those days we didn't go eat out as much as we do now. In fact, eating out was pretty rare. And I think most people here would agree that you might have had a hamburger once every 2 or 3 months. But we were going to town, and there was a little place in Delta that sold hamburgers and shakes, and they had really good shakes and malts. I like malts, and they're almost extinct. And Sam said, I'm going to get you something. It's the favorite thing you'll ever eat. It's so good. But you can't open your eyes until you get it. And so he got me this shake. And he brought it to me, and I had my eyes closed, and he says, okay, now take a drink of your shake. And I pulled back on the straw and went, whoa! Sam, it tastes like maraschino cherries and pineapple. He said, yeah, isn't it great? And we laughed about that for years, Sam and I, because if you want to please someone, find out what they like. When we build churches, and I love, they're beautiful churches, they're great things, but they're built for the people. The tabernacle was not built for the people. It was a place for God. Why is this important? Because the Day of Atonement, what happened on the Day of Atonement? Yom Kippur. What's the, I mean, you can tell me. Certainly, I think we all know this was the one day a year that the high priest went in before the ark. Other than that, the ark was never seen. There are historical examples that you brought out. The priests carried the ark into the Jordan. We're not even sure. I mean, I'm not. I suspect it was covered. Because that's, Kohath was very explicitly commanded, again, when you transport the ark, you cover it with the shielding curtain. One day a year, the high priest is allowed to go in, and he can't go in, I'm not sure you know all this, without the most holy place being filled with incense, without blood being sprinkled before it, and this blood is from the sin offerings for the priest, which was a bull, the sin offering for the people, which was a goat. And all this in order for the priest to go into the most holy place, which is where, if you read in Exodus 25, God sat on his throne. The mercy seat is a picture of a throne where God sat. In fact, if you go to Jeremiah 3, it's one of the funny things, too, you see with both Christians and some Jews. The Jews in general know the Old Testament better than we, so they don't do this quite as often. But you have a lot of people looking for the ark. In fact, I suspect that the Temple Institute will build another one. But in Jeremiah 3, it says they won't ask for the ark, they won't look for the ark. Because Jerusalem will be called the throne of the Lord. If you look at the construction of the tabernacle, it was very much a picture of a throne room. It had an outer court, an inner court, and a throne, which was the outer court, the holy place, and the most holy place. And just to remind you, Esther was the wife of the king. When she went into the most holy place, was it safe? What did the king have to do so that her life, if the king had not reached out his scepter, what would have happened to Esther? The guards of the king would have killed her immediately because there's no questions asked. We have, as believers and those who follow the Bible, we have a concept of the presence of God that's probably not entirely accurate. Now, certainly, God's everywhere, right? It says, am I not a God far away as well as near? Psalm 139, if I ascend to the heavens, you're there. If I go to the depths, you're there. I can't go any place to escape your presence. Is God in this room right now? Of course he is. The issue is not where is God. The issue is, do you sense or know or hear his voice? When you look at the construction of the tabernacle, and it lists these things and it gives very exact dimensions for them, and significantly to me, and I wish the Bible talked more about it, when God told David to build the temple, it's very different. How many lampstands were in the temple? 10. How many tables? 10. 10 lavers. It's all different. But it's the same pattern. I think there's something about human beings, and I know there is in me, and I'll bet there is in you, that we want to experience God's presence. We want to hear his voice. We want to know what God is saying. But there's a picture here in the Day of Atonement and in the tabernacle that God says, you've got to follow this pattern. Remember what Yeshua said about somebody who enters any other way than the gate? What did he say about them? Remember John 10? I'll turn there so I don't... we've had this fight in our country over immigration. And I thought it's quite interesting when you look at that whole thing, because the very essence of what creates a human being or a nation is the boundary. If there's no boundary, you're not a human. If there's no boundary, it's not a nation. Because if you can't tell when you're in the nation and out of it, it's not a nation. The same as if I can't tell when I'm touching you or I'm not. There's something called a boundary. John 10, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. That seems kind of harsh. But if you come to my house and you knock on the door and I say, come in, you have respected my boundary. You have come to my house and you said, this is John and Joy's house. I'm going to ask permission to come in. But if you come in through the window, if you come in without asking, you're a thief and a robber. We have a hard time understanding this with God. There's a door. What's the doorway to God? I'm the way, the truth, and the life. What's the next part of that statement? No one comes to the Father except through or by me. And a couple of times, here in John 10, Yeshua says, I'm the door. In fact, if you walk through the tabernacle as we lay it out, every item in the tabernacle is a picture of the work of Yeshua. One of the things I've noticed is that very often people will say they know the Lord, they'll say they hear God's voice, and they do awful things. How is this possible? If you're old like me, you remember a fellow named Lafferty. Who knows who Lafferty is? He's a fellow that killed a couple of people because God told him to. It was in American Fork, I think. I've never forgotten his name because I thought it was a convenient excuse. We all know that can't be possible. How do we know when we've heard the voice of Yahweh, when we've heard Yeshua's voice? And so I got thinking, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at when God's presence has shown up. And one of the things that I noticed when you look at God showing up, that there's one feature of his character that never fails to be shown to the people that are in the place where he shows up. If you recall, when Aaron and Moses put the tabernacle together, took Aaron's sons and dedicated them, and then they dedicated the tabernacle and started the burnt offering. After Aaron had put the burnt offering on the altar, what happened? Remember? Fire came down and consumed the offering. That's a pretty good indication that God is there. Right after that, Nadab and Abihu went in with incense, but they offered that incense with strange fire. What happened to them? Fire came out from the presence of God. When David made the great sin You recall he counted the fighting men of Israel when he knew he shouldn't. In fact, the person he gave the job, Joab, said, no, we shouldn't do this. But he went ahead and made it happen. A great plague fell upon the land. Well, David went to the threshing floor of Arana, or Ornan, depending on your translation, and he asked Arana, can I buy this place? Because I need to make an offering here. And it doesn't really clearly tell us why he chose this place. What happened at this place before? The threshing floor of Arana is also the place of what? The binding of Isaac. It's where Isaac was offered. It's on Mount Moriah, or Moriah. I'm getting to where I say Moriah so people don't think I'm talking about that one. But when he made the offering, Arana wanted to give it to him. He's the king, and he says, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. Very important point. But David, when he made the offering, fire came down. And if you go, I think I've got maybe I don't. It's in Chronicles. The Lord showed David something after he made that offering. He said, this is to be the place for the temple. I have been in the dome of the rock, and I have seen this floor. It's amazing when you go to Israel and you see something 3,500 years ago, something happened there that has everything to do with who we are. And what is interesting to me, the feature of God's personality that shows up when people come into his presence almost always, number one, is his holiness, his separateness. God has a boundary. If you violate that boundary, what happens? Think about this with me. In the New Testament church, we call it, in the book of Acts, all kinds of miracles are happening. Peter, especially, but the apostles, Peter and John, that it got so saturated with the Holy Spirit that his shadow could fall on someone and they would be healed. That's the presence of God. That's powerful. What did Ananias and Sapphira do? They decided that they loved what was happening here. They liked this. And they said, but everybody that's a part of this is giving up, they're selling all their property, bringing their money, giving it to the apostles, and they're sharing. Well, that sounds pretty good, but it's kind of scary. So we're going to sell our stuff and keep part back, just in case. Why would they go to Peter and attempt to deceive Peter, let alone the Holy Spirit? I posit to you that they had not experienced the presence of God. Because if they had, they wouldn't have dreamed of lying to Peter. Because they'd know full well that if God is using Peter to heal people with his shadow, he's going to know when they're lying to him. It is so easy to be around the presence of God and miss it. And in fact, one of the things I've been asking the Lord to show me is that I don't miss his holiness, his separateness. Because it is so easy to manipulate God to do what I want. See, Ananias and Sapphira thought, well, this is a good thing. Look at how powerful God's moving and the fellowship that they're experiencing. We want to be a part of that, but just in case this doesn't pan out, we're going to keep some money back. Do you realize they could have gone to Peter and said, we want to be part of what you're doing, but we're not quite ready to go all the way, so we're going to bring you some money, but we're keeping some. What would have been the problem? Nothing. It would have been fine. Why didn't they want to do that? Anybody here ever wanted to look like you were doing it, even if you weren't, or not quite? There's something very powerful about looking like you're performing. And I always think about Isaiah. When you read the first 5 books of the book of Isaiah, it's a powerful, I want to say Jeremiah, that's mixing metaphors, but it's an imprecation against the sin of Israel. You read those first chapters, it starts right in chapter 1. In fact, chapter 1, Isaiah speaking for God says, I wish you'd stop the festivals and the Sabbaths. He said, all of it's meaningless to me, this trampling of the courts. He says, you need to change how you're living. So Isaiah was very rough on the children of Israel. He was extremely strong. And he tells, chapter 5, I think, one of those chapters, he says, house of Israel is the vineyard. Where's the harvest? He says, my vineyard's growing thorns. It's distasteful. Lord just, anyway, it goes on and on. And in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah has a vision. And in the vision, he sees the Lord, and he sees the throne of the Lord. And there are seraphim. And what do the seraphim say? Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh Tsabaoth. In Hebrew, if you say something 3 times, what does that mean? Infinite, right? We do the comparative, good, better, and best. In Hebrew, you say something twice. Exodus 15, where the Lord says, if you will listening, none of the diseases of Egypt will come on you. And what does listening mean? Shema, Shema. What does that mean? It means if you really listen hard. If it says holy, 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 it means that's all there is, right there in that moment. What is Isaiah's response? This man that has had his finger pointed at the nation of Israel, that has been, I don't know if you'd say condemning him, but they've been wicked and sinful, and they've turned away from the Lord. What does he do? In his vision, when he sees the Lord, and he sees these seraphim saying, holy, holy, holy. Falls on the ground, and he says, woe is me. For I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. One of the things that strikes me, because I was thinking about the Day of Atonement, coming into the presence of the Lord. Do any of you have a sense, like I do, that we've lost the holiness of God? He's holy. And I lose that sometimes. Like I'll read the story that Kaya mentioned about the ark coming back, and it came to, I think it was Beth Shemesh, didn't it? And they were delighted. They were so glad that the ark had come back to Israel. So what did they do? They opened it and looked inside. How'd that work? And you think, well, doesn't God want to bless them? Of course he wants to bless them. That's not the way you come into God's presence. That's the thief and the robber. That's not going through the gate. If you read Scripture, God faithfully wants his people to be in his presence. And I don't know about you, but I've always thought that I would love to have lived at the time of Yeshua, and I wouldn't have missed him. How many of you remember the stories, and I hadn't really seen this, where Yeshua, I don't really know the living arrangements with Yeshua and his 12 apostles. I don't. But how many of you know that they were pretty close? Weren't they living in each other's pockets? I'd like you to go to Matthew 14. You go to Matthew 14 and start with verse 13. I want to show you something because it is so easy to ask for something and not really want it. Or to ask for something and it's in front of you and you don't see it. How far do you and I need to go to find God? Not very far. When Yeshua heard what had happened, this is after the beheading of John the Baptist, the immerser, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Yeshua landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Yeshua replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." Now put yourself in their boat. What would you be saying? You're crazy. That's what they said. "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Very likely, just said the Jewish blessing today over the bread. I'm sure that's what he did. You've got some translations that say he blessed it. It is not in there. He blessed. He said the broke over the bread with him. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. I want you to put yourself in this situation. How would you have responded? If you're going around with Yeshua, and he's been healing people, so you've seen the power of God, but now he takes 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and it turns out to be so much food. If there are 5,000 men there, how many people are probably there? Yeah, could be 10 or 15,000. Would you agree? The size of a pretty good city. 5 loaves. I don't know about you. It seems like this might mark Yeshua as different. Immediately, Yeshua made the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, I want you to notice something, and I had missed this. David Jeremiah woke me up to this. Yeshua made him get in the boat, didn't he? Look what it says. Immediately, Yeshua made, and he put him in a boat for what? What immediately happened when they got on the Galilee, the Kinneret? A storm. He did it on purpose. At least I don't know about you. I don't think he was tricked here. During the 4th watch of the night, when is the 4th watch of the night? 3 o'clock, right? About 3 to 6 in the morning. I don't know about you. You should be home in bed. They've been on the water a long time fighting. If you go to the other Gospels, you'll find out they were rowing. John, I think, says they were out like 3 miles into the lake. They were in extreme distress. And whose fault was it? I'm doing this on purpose because I have done this in my life. Bad things happen to me, and I say the enemy has got me. Generally, it's not. It's generally the enemy is not your problem or mine. Yeshua put them on that water, and he probably called for the storm. I don't know that, but he is certainly aware of it. They've been out there all night. They're rowing, they're sweating, they're terrified. During the 4th watch, he comes out to them walking on the lake. When they saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Yeshua immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter said, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Yeshua. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Yeshua reached out his hand and caught him. "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And it says they got over. Turn over to Matthew 16. I want you to look at something else. I hadn't seen this clearly, and it kind of was a moment of conviction for me. Because like I said, I've always thought if I could have just watched Yeshua, if I could have been there for the miracles, then I would not struggle with unbelief. And I realize that's the biggest lie I've ever told in my life. Go ahead, Ron. Yeah. No, here's the interesting thing. They had just watched Yeshua. He's been healing people. And here's another thing. Got to throw this in too. When God does something all the time, you take it for granted. How many of you know when you hurt yourself, you get better? And it happens all the time, and you take it for granted. That's a picture of the very nature of God. Romans 1 says this, and the writings say it also, that if you want to see the personality of God, look at his creation. But they've been watching Yeshua heal, and it doesn't seem like it could get blasé, but obviously it wasn't, because here they've been watching him heal, they watched him walk on the water, they see him get in the boat, the wind stops, and they're still struggling to see who he is. Here in Matthew 16, if you go down to verse 5, when they went across the lake, the disciples forgot to take bread. "Be careful," Yeshua said to them. "Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So what was the first thing the disciples thought they were? What did they think he was getting after them for? But they forgot to take bread. Was that what he was talking about? It was the furthest thing from his mind. They discussed this among themselves. It's because we didn't bring any bread. Aware of their discussion, Yeshua asked, "You of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread?" It hit me in this strong way as I've been thinking about this week, that one of the lessons of Yom Kippur is to understand that to come into God's presence requires following his way, but it also requires that you're looking for him. And here's the hard thing for me. When I pray, and I bet you do, but maybe you don't, but I'll bet you do, I look for inclinations, nudges from the Spirit that agree with me. That's not God's first trait he's going to show you. His first trait will be what? Holiness. And because he's a holy God, the first thing he might say to me is, "John, it's disgraceful what you just said or what you just did." It isn't that he doesn't comfort us. It's that there's, and I just keep thinking about the fact, in fact, yeah, let's go to Mark 6. This is telling the same story. And I'm going to start with verse 47. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to them. We already talked, this is like 3 in the morning. Walking on the lake, he was about to pass by them. I love that. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. So he sees the disciples, and what are they doing? They're straining at the oars. He comes waltzing by on the water. The story is wonderful. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. The biggest danger that we face as we come into this time, or really any time of the year, is to allow life to harden us so that we don't see what God is doing in our lives. To miss the message, and also to realize he loves us, he'll take care of us, but he always has. Do you realize that you've had miracles in your life that can act like the loaves, and you can forget them? And another thing that's hard for me, I have a lot easier time seeing God in the good times than I do in the bad times. Where was Yeshua when they were straining at the oars and wondering if they were going to make it? If you go to John, they're terrified because of this storm. I always thought, that's so harsh to say you have little faith, and then I realized he's saying, when are you going to realize that you can just depend on me? I'm here with you. I'll get you through this. There's something that happens where we actually see God in the trial. I got up to milk this morning, and I milked the second herd, and they just flew through. It was going great. I was slapping myself on the back. Man, this is going good. By the time Hernan comes here, I'll be halfway through first herd. Well, the third set, I think, or maybe the fifth set of pen 4, a cow came in, and I could see right now this cow's not doing well. If you've ever been around cows that have just calved and they get low on calcium, they start this stuff, swaying and sweating. And nothing you can do, down in the barn. And I was so frustrated because my schedule had been changed. What I had planned didn't happen. And in my mind, that was an attack of the enemy. Then I heard that voice. The enemy didn't do this. Where's your faith? I don't have any faith. You've never done that? Oh, it was such a mess. And so this cow is down. I milked the cows in front of her, let them out. And then I don't want the cows to come in on that side because I need to give this cow calcium and then get her back up. But I had a heifer leap over the top of her. And I barely got her stopped. And I mean, it was like one thing after another went wrong. I put the needle in her vein, and she struggled, and the needle got out, and we got what we call extravasation, where the calcium goes outside the vein, makes a big thing, and I have to turn her over and do the other side. I mean, it was just it was a template for frustration. And I was God's man of power, and he was supposed to make life easy. And I thought, oh, we're on the water. And it was funny when I realized that I could just hear Yeshua saying, John, I'm right here. I'm here in my glory and my power. I haven't gone anywhere. How come you can't remember the miracle of the loaves and fishes? And I said, cut it out. You may not have discussions like this with the Lord, but it was funny, actually. And I just finally came to place, you know what? I'm going to get through this. The cows are going to get through this. I finally did get her up, got the cow's milk, had another one jump over her. And, but I realized I cost myself a lot of time in the presence of the Lord because I'm waiting for it to be perfect for me. It's about Him. It's not about me. It's about making it right for Him. It's about creating a place in my heart where He can dwell. And as hard as it is for me to realize that, it doesn't need to be perfect for me. Because He's perfect. And this is really a wonderful time when you think about it, as we approach Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. But if we don't at least take a moment and say, Lord, I want to see You, Yeshua. I want to sense Your presence, and I want to get at it. It's almost, the word is almost attack of Your holiness. Because when I look at us as Christians, and a lot of wonderful things happen from Christianity, but I see so many of us who are Messianic Christian. We believe in Yeshua. We believe in the Word, and yet we still have this idea that God is here to make things go our way. He's the God of the miracles. He can make His way happen out of... I mean, have you ever read the book of Job and think that's the most unfair thing you've ever read in your life? Did God's purpose get accomplished? Absolutely. Was it nice for Job? No. Do I understand that? No. But God is holy. He's righteous. He's worthy to be praised. Monday will come. And you know, we've got so much going on. I was thinking about the fact we've had so many blessings by going to the private school, but the private school has made it hard for us. Did I say? I probably mean public. It's made it hard. And yet, it's no excuse to not realize there's something about the 10th day of the 7th month that God has something He wants to do. It's not at my bidding, at my discretion. He instituted and initiated the invitation. So for those of us who can get together, we can look at the Word and meditate on that. And also we can join in. I think you probably all know that believers from all over the nation have come to Washington, D.C. today to pray for our nation. And I don't know about you, but I think our nation needs to be prayed for. In fact, what's interesting to me is that when I hear people, and they mean well, but people come from the opposite sides of the political spectrum, and they're praying for their political will to be accomplished. I have a hunch that the better prayer is, not my will, but Your will be done. And one of the things we've lost in this country is that our opponents are holy, even as those who agree with us. Though those who agree with us are a little holier, maybe. But seriously, this is a wonderful time. It's a time to prepare. And if you go back, and it's about time for us to close today, if you go back and look at all the times where Yeshua talks about this miracle of the 5,000, like Ron says, the miracle of the 4,000, and over he keeps telling His disciples, you didn't understand. You still didn't get the message. You still, and I don't know about you, but it seems like in every new bad situation, I need another dose of faith. And Yeshua is saying, if I healed the sick, if I fed the 5,000, then however I'm going to do it, I'm going to take care of this situation on the water. And I'm going to keep sending you storms. I'm going to keep sending you things because I love you. And I want your faith to be built on the rock and not on this fickle up and down thing of the way we feel. Because I don't know about you, my feelings, I'm actually kind of glad that there's not a video of how I performed in the parlor, though Kara, bless her heart, came in there and took a picture of the cow with her legs out into the aisle. And I found this out because Sharon said she saw it. Isn't it nice how things get shared nowadays? Kids take a picture. I just hope I didn't do anything untoward in that. But it's interesting that we are looking for God to make our life easier. And I really believe he wants to. I believe he wants to give you the desires of your heart. I think, but how many times has you? How many times has he? And I think the thing that comes to me out of this story is that stand on the testimony of what God has done in your life. Don't ever fail to proclaim it, to testify to what he has done. And then you can just say like Job, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Did you have your hand up, Greg? I'm sacrosanct. Exactly. And as it is time to bring this to a close. One of the things that helped me as I was thinking about this and realizing there is inside of us this hunger, this thirst for the presence of the Lord. There's this thing that, in fact, I remember when I first got the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And I could recall that the Scripture says that when the Spirit comes, he'll testify of me. I was not prepared for the overflow of love that came out of me for Yeshua. I didn't know where it came from. It was crazy. It was transforming. And yet, one of the things that I find is that I actually need the Lord to put things in my path to remind me that I can't do it without him. You see, this is because God is so good. You know, God allows you to move your arm and to breathe and all those things at your discretion. He allows you that. And when you forget that it's God that's giving you the ability to breathe, to move, that's when you get in trouble. Did you have your hand? it's really true that, and this is one of the things that's had me pondering. I enjoy social media, but sometimes I'm not enjoying it as much because there's so much polarization. But one of the things that I've noticed on social media is it's very easy to get on your high horse and decide that God feels like you do. One of the things that the Lord has shown me is that if anything causes me to look at another human being and not see them as made in the image of God with value and supreme love from the Father to them, it's not from God. I don't care how righteous it is, how good it looks. And it's one of the reasons that we get into these battles and whatever. I'm always struck by the fact that in rabbinical tradition, as well as biblical stories, a central role for Aaron is peace. A central role is to bring shalom, this sense of wellness, of well-being. And you know, God would not let Aaron and Levi have an inheritance. Because to have an inheritance prevented them from doing their job. Because if Levi has a territory and it's next to Judah and it's next to Gad, they're either going to take favorites or it would be too simple for them to, what's the best word here? I guess play favorites is fine. They have to equally be for all of God's people. One of the things I think when we think about the presence of God, why was it Aaron who got to go in and see the most holy place once a year? It's because he's this picture of carrying all of Israel. He's got the names on his shoulders. He's got the names over his heart. He's got the 12 loaves. He is surrounded by the concept that he is there for every single person. I would suggest as we come to this Day of Atonement, if there's anything in us that doesn't like, that shuns, that pushes away any human being, that is not the most holy one, no matter how righteous it feels. I like a statement that Bishop made in the writing to the brethren at Partone. It's a letter that he wrote. And he said, I'm pleading with you to have faith in each other. And I've said that to people before, then they'll list all the reasons why they can't trust this person. Then I ask myself, but God trusted me. This is a very important thing. And as you think about it, God yearns for us to be in his presence as we yearn to be in his. But he is holy. He's not going to share his glory. I think at times it's hard to cross that bridge, so to speak, where we give up what we wanted, what we felt, and take up what God had. But unless we do that, the Day of Atonement remains elusive, and we never come into the most holy place. Just think with me as we close now. If the high priest, and that was a picture of Yeshua, that high priest, if the only way he came to the most holy place, to the ark, was to carry the names on his shoulders, over his heart, and then 12 loaves, if that's the only way, I think that's how you and I are coming into it. It's all together. Let's all stand. Brother Ron Crouch, would you close?